That first-class ticket is fake. Step aside now before I call security." The words cut through the busy air at Gate C-18 of Chicago O'Hare International Airport, silencing nearby conversations. Passengers turned to stare at the confrontation, a stern-faced gate agent glaring down at a young black teenager holding a mobile boarding pass. Brenda Matthews, her graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, Level 2 TSA clearance badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights, stood with arms crossed, her expression hardening as she repeated herself. "I said step aside. You're holding up the boarding process for legitimate passengers." The emphasis on legitimate wasn't subtle. 3 businessmen in the priority line exchanged uncomfortable glances. A woman in designer clothing clutched her handbag tighter. Marcus Wilson, 17. Dressed in a navy blue sweater over a crisp white button-down and khaki pants, kept his face carefully neutral, despite the heat rising to his cheeks. The Stanford Coding Camp acceptance letter tucked in his carry-on suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Ma'am, there's no mistake," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the unnecessary scrutiny. "This is my assigned seat. 2A. First class." The ticket was purchased legally through the Chairman's Circle program. Brenda's eyes narrowed at the mention of Chairman's Circle, Atlantic Sky's most exclusive loyalty tier, typically reserved for C-suite executives and million-mile flyers. Her gaze swept over Marcus again, lingering on his sneakers, taking mental inventory of everything that, to her, signaled he didn't belong. "FCSA verification required," she announced loudly, using industry jargon for first-class security authorization. She tapped aggressively at her terminal. "System shows a flag on this upgrade. Potential fraudulent activity." A young Hispanic gate agent, Kevin Rodriguez, glanced up from the adjacent position, his brow furrowing as he observed the interaction. His own terminal showed something different. A completely valid Chairman's Circle authorization attached to Marcus's boarding pass. The verification code bore the distinct signature of an executive-level override. Behind Marcus, the priority boarding line grew. A man in an expensive suit checked his watch impatiently, while a middle-aged woman craned her neck to see what was causing the delay. The Delta and United gates across the concourse operated smoothly, passengers flowing through without incident. Only here at Atlantic Sky Gate C-18 had the routine of boarding ground to a halt over a black teenager in first class. "Perhaps I can help," Kevin began, taking a half-step toward Brenda's station. "Return to your position." "Rodriguez?" Brenda cut him off. "I'll handle this potential security breach." Her emphasis on security immediately escalated what had been a verification question into something more ominous. 300 miles away in the glass-walled executive boardroom, atop the Atlantic Sky headquarters in New York, Lawrence Wilson stood before a digital display showing merger integration timelines. Projected revenue synergies from combining with European carrier Meridian Airways scrolled across the screen as 12 board members and executives followed his presentation. The potential $2 billion deal would reshape transatlantic travel and cement Atlantic Sky's position as a global leader. Lawrence had no idea that at this very moment, his son was being publicly humiliated under the logo that bore their family name. That morning, as Marcus had embraced his mother goodbye in their Westchester home, her Chanel No. 5 perfume lingering on his sweater, her whispered, "Remember who you are," in his ear, she'd slipped something into his pocket. Now standing at Gate C-18, he felt for it a smooth stone, etched with the word dignity. Catherine Wilson, a formidable civil rights attorney known for her work challenging systemic discrimination, had given him this talisman after the Westview Mall incident 4 years ago. 13-year-old Marcus had gone shopping with friends flush with birthday money. While his white friends tried on expensive sneakers, unbothered, a security guard had followed Marcus throughout the store. The confrontation escalated when Marcus was stopped at the exit for a random bag check, the only one in his group subjected to this treatment. "They'll try to take your dignity," his mother had told him afterward, her voice steady, despite the fury in her eyes. Never let them. That night, while Marcus pretended to sleep, he'd overheard his parents arguing heatedly in the study, his mother's voice rising with indignation. "This is exactly why we need to file a lawsuit," Catherine had insisted, not just for Marcus, but for every black child who gets profiled while just trying to exist in public spaces. "Catherine, I understand your anger. I'm furious too," Lawrence had responded. "But lawsuits take years, and the psychological toll on Marcus would be immense. There are other ways to fight. Your other ways involve working within systems that were designed to exclude people who look like us," Catherine had countered. "Sometimes you need to tear things down to rebuild them properly." Their philosophical difference had been a constant undercurrent in the Wilson household, Lawrence believing in transformation from within, Catherine advocating for more radical approaches to justice. Each respected the other's methods, but their strategies remained distinct. The memory crystallized something for Marcus as he stood at gate C-18. This wasn't just about a boarding pass. This was about belonging, about who gets questioned and who passes through unnoticed, about whose presence requires justification and whose is taken for granted. "ID, please," Brenda demanded, extending her hand with an air of finality. "And a secondary form of identification. Secondary ID isn't required for domestic flights," Marcus stated calmly, recalling the TSA guidelines he'd studied. "But I'm happy to provide my student ID along with my digital boarding pass." The subtle assertion of his knowledge of proper protocol clearly irritated Brenda, whose lips thinned to a tight line as she took his school ID card. In his pocket, Marcus's fingers closed around the stone his mother had given him. Dignity. It wasn't just a word, it was a stance, a birthright, a battle his mother had been fighting in courtrooms while his father fought in boardrooms. And now, unexpectedly, it was his turn to stand his ground. "This identification is insufficient," Brenda announced after scrutinizing Marcus's student ID card. School IDs aren't on the TSA's list of primary or secondary verification documents for FCSA protocols. Kevin Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably at the adjacent station. As the newest gate agent at C-18 with only 8 months at Atlantic Sky, he was still learning the complex web of policies and unwritten rules. But he knew enough to recognize that Brenda was selectively applying protocols that were typically reserved for international flights or specific security alerts. For Kevin, this moment carried personal weight. 3 years ago, his mother, a naturalized citizen from Honduras, had been pulled aside at Miami International and questioned for 2 hours because her accent had triggered a gate agent's suspicion. The humiliation in her eyes when she finally emerged from secondary screening had changed something in Kevin. It was why he'd chosen customer service over the higher-paying ramp position he'd originally been offered. Actually, Kevin said, his voice professional but firm. According to Atlantic Sky Operations Manual Section 5.3, student IDs are acceptable for domestic boarding verification when accompanied by a digitally verified boarding pass. I processed Mr. Wilson's check-in myself at the main counter. His Chairman's Circle authorization is logged in the STAR system with verification code EC1104. The code's prefix EC wasn't lost on anyone with airline knowledge. Executive confirmation was the highest level of passenger verification in the system, typically reserved for C-suite overrides. Brenda's eyes flashed with irritation. That's a recent policy change that hasn't been fully implemented, and the Chairman's Circle verification requires additional security checks when the passenger profile doesn't match typical user parameters. Doesn't match typical user parameters, Dr. Gabriela Ramirez, standing 3 people behind Marcus in line, stepped forward. The silver-streaked hair and commanding presence of the Stanford Medical School professor drew immediate attention. Would you mind clarifying exactly what parameters Mr. Wilson doesn't match? Brenda's face flushed slightly. This is an airline security matter. We have statistical models for fraud detection based on what Dr. Ramirez pressed her tone, measured, but insistent. Age, appearance, or something else. The implication hung in the air, uncomfortable and undeniable. Brenda reached for the phone at her station, her movements deliberate and performative. Atlantic Sky Procedures Manual. Section 7.2 requires security notification for any boarding irregularity involving premium cabin access. I'm following protocol. She dialed quickly, turning slightly away from the growing audience. Gate C18 requesting TSA and airport security presence for a FCSA verification issue. Potential fraudulent boarding attempt. The code words "especially fraudulent" sent an immediate ripple through the gathered passengers. Phones began to emerge from pockets and purses, some openly recording, others held discreetly at waist level. Marcus felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. He knew exactly what was happening. The transformation from passenger to suspect, from student to threat, from person to problem. It had happened at Westview Mall at his school's science fair, when he'd presented his advanced algorithm, and now here, in the supposed meritocracy of air travel. He reached for his phone to call his father, but Brenda's voice cut through his thoughts. "Sir, please keep your hands visible and step away from the boarding podium," she instructed loudly, as if he were suddenly dangerous. "Security has been notified and will escort you to a secondary screening area." "This is completely unnecessary," Kevin interjected, abandoning professional restraint. "I've verified his documentation." "This is one more word, Rodriguez, and you'll be written up for security protocol interference," Brenda snapped. "Return to your station." Kevin fell silent, but didn't move back to his position, his presence a quiet rebellion against what was unfolding. Instead, he reached slowly for his own phone, angling it to capture what was happening. In the distance, the distinctive blue uniforms of airport security became visible, officers Patterson and Riley approaching, with the confident stride of authority responding to a potential threat. Marcus took a deep breath, centering himself as his mother had taught him. Then he dialed his father's number, knowing that what happened next would change everything. "Attention all units. Code 257 at Gate C18, Atlantic Sky Terminal. Respondent officers Patterson and Riley en route. ETA 30 seconds. The security dispatch crackled through the airport's secure radio system, alerting all nearby personnel to a potential boarding fraud in progress. The designation that had been assigned to Marcus Wilson with a few keystrokes from Brenda Matthews. Officer James Patterson, a 15-year veteran of O'Hare Security with a military background, led the response. His partner Thomas Riley was newer to the force, but eager to demonstrate his authority. Both had responded to dozens of gate incidents, before most resolved with minimal intervention, some requiring passenger removal, a few resulting in arrests. As they approached Gate C18, they performed their standard visual assessment: crowd dynamics, potential escape routes, subject identification. They quickly spotted the young black male, standing apart from the line, phone in hand, matching the description provided in the dispatch. "Remember, visible hands, positive control, minimum force." "Necessary," Patterson muttered to Riley, who had a tendency to escalate situations unnecessarily. "Subject appears non-threatening, but maintains standard protocol." Riley responded using the security jargon they'd been trained to employ. Marcus heard his father's assistant answer on the fourth ring. "Mr. Wilson's office." "This is Marcus." He said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I need to speak to my father immediately. It's an emergency." The last word caught in his throat. Samantha Taylor, a travel blogger with over 2 million followers, had been documenting her first-class experience when the confrontation began. Now her live stream captured the approaching security officers, her narration providing real-time context to a rapidly growing online audience. I'm at O'Hare Airport, Gate C-18, where a young black passenger is being questioned about his valid first-class ticket, she narrated quietly. Security has been called, and wait, they're approaching him now. This is happening live. Patterson reached Marcus first, his stance professional but imposing. Sir, I'm Officer Patterson with Airport Security. We need you to step aside for additional verification. I'm on the phone with my father. Marcus replied, struggling to maintain his composure. There's been a misunderstanding about my ticket. Riley moved to position himself on Marcus's other side, creating a subtle containment formation. Sir, you can make your call after we've resolved this security concern. Please come with us now. Dr. Ramirez stepped forward. Officers, I've witnessed this entire interaction. This young man has done nothing wrong. His ticket was verified by another agent. And ma'am, please step back. Patterson interrupted firmly. This is a security matter. Kevin Rodriguez, still standing nearby, attempted one final intervention. Officers, as an Atlantic Sky employee, I can confirm that his ticket and identification are valid. There's no security issue here. Sir, return to your station, Riley ordered. Airline personnel not directly involved need to stand clear during security protocols. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Passengers were now openly filming the confrontation, having transformed from a customer service issue into a public spectacle. Through the phone, Marcus heard his father's voice for the first time. Marcus, what's happening? Before he could respond fully, Officer Riley made a critical decision, one that would be replayed millions of times in the hours to come. Misinterpreting Marcus's focus on the phone call as non-compliance, he reached for his handcuffs. Sir, I need you to end your call and comply with security directives, Riley stated firmly. Dad, Marcus managed to say they're trying to detain me at Gate C-18. They don't believe my ticket is real. They think I'm... In one swift motion, Riley took the phone from Marcus's hand and passed it to Patterson, then pulled Marcus's wrists behind his back. The cold metal of the handcuffs closed with an audible click that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent gate area. Standard restraint protocol for non-compliant subjects, Riley announced to the watching crowd using security terminology to justify what everyone could see was a massive overreaction. Samantha Taylor's live stream captured the moment in high definition, her shocked voice providing commentary. They just handcuffed him. They just put a 17-year-old in handcuffs for trying to board with a valid first-class ticket. Patterson, holding Marcus's phone, heard the voice still coming through the speaker, a voice that had transformed from concerned to coldly furious. Who is this? Lawrence Wilson demanded, his tone carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command. Officer Patterson, O'Hare Airport Security, Patterson replied automatically. Officer Patterson. Lawrence's voice was now deadly calm. You have just handcuffed my 17-year-old son for attempting to board a flight with a ticket I personally authorized. I am Lawrence Wilson, CEO of Atlantic Sky Airlines. I strongly suggest you remove those handcuffs immediately and put my son back on the phone. Patterson's face drained of color as the implications hit him. He glanced at Marcus, then at the Atlantic Sky logo prominently displayed above the gate, the same name his passenger had given the same name, now identifying himself as the airline's CEO. But it was too late. The handcuffs were already on the phones, already recording the damage already done. What should have been a routine boarding had become a viral moment of injustice, one that would shake an entire industry to its core. In the Atlantic Sky boardroom, Lawrence Wilson stood before a projected slide showing integration timelines for the Meridian Airways merger. The potential $2 billion deal had consumed his attention for months, representing both enormous opportunity and significant risk for the airline he had built from the ground up over 20 years. As you can see from the financial projections Lawrence was explaining to the assembled executives and board members, the synergies from combining our North American network with Meridian's European presence would generate approximately. The boardroom door opened, interrupting his presentation. His executive assistant Janet Chen entered, with an expression Lawrence had never seen in their 15 years working together, a mixture of urgency and distress that immediately set off internal alarms. "Mr. Wilson," she said quietly, approaching him rather than speaking from the doorway. "There's an emergency call from Marcus. He says it's urgent." Lawrence checked his watch. Marcus should be boarding his flight to San Francisco by now. A personal interruption during the most important meeting of the quarter was unprecedented. "Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse me for a moment," he said smoothly. Years of executive presence masking his concern as he stepped into his adjacent private office. Janet followed, closing the door behind them. He called on the emergency line. "He sounds distressed." Lawrence picked up the secure line, his mind racing through possibilities. A medical issue, a security threat, a problem with his flight. Marcus. "What's wrong?" The voice that responded wasn't his son's, but a stranger's. "Officer Patterson, O'Hare, Airport Security." Lawrence's grip tightened on the phone. "Where is my son, sir?" "Your son is currently being detained following a security incident at Gate C-18. He was attempting to board using a first-class ticket that triggered our fraud protocols and became non-compliant when non-compliant Lawrence interrupted his voice, dropping to a dangerous register. My son is 17 years old and was attempting to board a flight on my airline using a ticket I personally authorized through my Chairman's Circle account. Put him on the phone. Now." There was a moment of hesitation before Patterson responded. "Sir, he's currently in restraints as per security protocol for restraints." The two syllables emerged as barely controlled fury. "Are you telling me my son is in handcuffs for attempting to board a flight with a valid ticket?" The silence on the other end confirmed what Lawrence could hardly believe. In the background, he could hear voices, passengers protesting, someone filming his son's measured tones, attempting to remain calm despite the humiliation. Lawrence closed his eyes briefly, a technique he developed over decades to center himself in crisis. When he opened them, Janet took an involuntary step back. She had never seen this expression on her boss's face before. "Officer Patterson." Lawrence said each word precisely enunciated. "I want those handcuffs removed from my son immediately. I want the name and badge number of every officer and airline employee involved in this incident. And I am informing you that I will be arriving at O'Hare within 90 minutes on my private jet." He paused, listening to Patterson's stammered response about protocols and procedures. "Let me be perfectly clear," Lawrence continued, cutting him off. "What is happening right now is not a misunderstanding. It is not a protocol issue. It is racial profiling occurring on my airline to my son under my name, and there will be consequences." As he ended the call, Lawrence turned to Janet, his decision already made. "Contact Robert O'Malley, head of operations at O'Hare. Tell him I want my son released immediately, and those responsible suspended pending investigation. Then have my plane prepared for immediate departure to Chicago." "What about the merger meeting?" Janet asked, glancing toward the boardroom where 12 executives and board members were waiting. Lawrence's expression hardened further. "Tell them the meeting is postponed due to a family emergency. And Janet, contact Lisa Parker in legal. Tell her to meet me at the airport. This isn't just a family matter anymore." As Janet left to execute his instructions, Lawrence remained alone for 30 seconds, all he would allow himself before action. In that brief moment, the careful compartmentalization he had maintained throughout his career collapsed. The professional CEO, the strategic executive, the calculated businessman, all receded before the more primal identity of a father whose child was suffering. He remembered the day Marcus was born, holding his tiny hand and making a silent promise to protect him from a world that would too often see his skin before seeing his humanity. He had believed, perhaps naively, that his success, his wealth, his position, his influence would somehow shield his son from the indignities he himself had experienced on his climb to the top. That illusion was now shattered, replaced by cold fury and resolute purpose. When Lawrence Wilson strode back into the boardroom, the assembled executives fell silent, sensing the transformation. Michael Donovan, the CFO who had known Lawrence for 15 years, actually took a half step back when their eyes met. "The meeting is adjourned," Lawrence announced, gathering his materials with quick, precise movements. "A situation requires my immediate attention in Chicago." Lawrence began. "Thomas Reynolds, the board chairman. This merger timeline is extremely tight. Perhaps someone else could handle whatever's come up." Lawrence paused, fixing Reynolds with a stare that made the older man visibly uncomfortable. "My 17-year-old son has just been placed in handcuffs for attempting to board one of our flights with a valid first-class ticket. So no Thomas. No one else will be handling this." The shocked silence that followed him out of the boardroom confirmed what Lawrence already knew. This wasn't just a personal crisis or a customer service failure. It was a moment that would define his leadership, his company, and his legacy in ways none of them could yet imagine. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into Marcus's wrists as Officer Patterson led him away from Gate C-18. Standard issue Peerless Model 700 restraints, hinged rather than chained, designed to provide maximum control with minimum risk of injury. This clinical detail floated absurdly through Marcus's mind. A fragment from a criminal justice documentary he'd watched last month, now suddenly horrifyingly relevant to his own experience. "This is completely unnecessary," Dr. Gabriela Ramirez insisted, keeping pace alongside them. "He's a minor. He's shown his ID. He's nonviolent. There is absolutely no justification for restraints." "Ma'am, please step back," Officer Riley responded mechanically. "This is a security matter." The terminal, normally a blur of anonymous travelers focused on their own journeys, had transformed into an audience. A sea of faces turned toward him, with expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort to outright indignation. Each step through the concourse was an exercise in acute awareness, the cold fluorescent lighting highlighting his dark skin against the officer's pale hands, the squeak of their tactical boots on the polished floor, the sudden hush that fell over conversations as they passed, followed by urgent whispers. Marcus kept his head high, though it took every ounce of his willpower. His father's words echoed in his mind, "Never let them see you break." It was advice Lawrence had given him years ago, after the incident at Westview Mall, guidance on navigating a world that often presumed his guilt before his innocence. The physical sensation of being restrained was worse than he'd imagined. The handcuffs weren't painfully tight, but they were unyielding, a constant pressure that made every movement awkward and restricted. His shoulders already ached from the unnatural position, but the physical discomfort paled compared to the psychological weight of being paraded through a public space in restraints. "I'm still recording," Samantha Taylor called out, walking backward to capture the procession on her phone. "This is a 17-year-old honor student being led away in handcuffs for trying to board a flight with a valid ticket. This is happening right now at O'Hare International Airport, Gate C-18, Atlantic Sky Airlines." Marcus could hear the live stream statistics in her running commentary. 300 viewers, 500, over 1,000, now watching his humiliation in real time. His mother would see this. His friends. His teachers. The thought made his stomach clench. Kevin Rodriguez had followed the group, still in his Atlantic Sky uniform, his face etched with distress. "This is wrong," he said, addressing no one in particular. I checked his documentation myself at the main counter. Everything was valid. This is a TSA Section 8 violation discrimination based on perceived demographic status. The technical term hung in the air, its official nature giving weight to what everyone was witnessing. This wasn't just unfair treatment. It was a codified violation of established transportation security protocols. From somewhere behind them, a child's voice piped up. "Mommy, why is that boy in handcuffs? Did he do something bad?" The innocent question cut through Marcus like a knife. This was the image being created of him as someone bad, someone dangerous, someone criminal. The narrative being written in the minds of everyone watching, including a child, who would perhaps carry this image of a handcuffed black teenager as one of their earliest memories of what danger looks like. "No, honey," came a woman's response louder than perhaps intended. "He didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people make mistakes." Marcus kept his eyes forward, focusing on a distant point to maintain his composure. His phone remained clutched awkwardly in Officer Patterson's hand, the line to his father still open. "We're heading toward the security office," he said quietly, when Patterson briefly held the phone to his ear. "There's a crowd following. People are filming. I'm 10 minutes into the flight." Lawrence's voice came through steady and reassuring, despite the underlying fury. "Robert O'Malley should be contacting the officers any moment now. Just stay calm, son. Remember who you are." Those last 4 words, his mother's parting reminder that morning, nearly broke his composure. Remember who you are. Not the suspect they were treating him as. Not the threat they perceived him to be. But Marcus Wilson's son, student programmer person. As if on cue, Officer Patterson's radio crackled to life. "Patterson, this is O'Malley. Bring the Wilson boy to my office immediately. Do not process him through standard security protocols. Repeat, bring him directly to my office. Over." Patterson exchanged a glance with his partner. "Copy that. En route to your office. Over." The subtle shift in the officer's demeanor was immediate, a new tension in their posture, a flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. The confidence with which they had approached the situation was evaporating as the realization dawned that they had potentially made a catastrophic error in judgment. As they approached a door marked "Airport Operations," authorized personnel only, Marcus felt the weight of this moment extending beyond his personal experience. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who had ever been questioned, detained, or humiliated based on assumptions about who belonged where. And perhaps, if his father's tone was any indication, it would become about ensuring such assumptions carried consequences. Officer Riley reached for the door handle, then paused, turning to Marcus with an expression that had transformed from authoritative to uncertain. "The handcuffs," he said quietly. "I think we can remove them now." As the key turned in the lock and the metal restraints fell away, Marcus rubbed his wrists, the skin red and chafed. The physical relief was immediate, but the invisible marks of the experience, the public humiliation, the presumption of guilt, the lesson in how quickly his dignity could be stripped away, those would remain long after the physical discomfort faded. The security office corridor felt worlds away from the bustling terminal. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everyone in an unflattering pallor that seemed fitting for the situation. Marcus followed the officers, still rubbing his wrists, hyper-aware of the small group of advocates who had refused to leave his side. "Wait here," Officer Patterson instructed the followers, gesturing to a small waiting area outside a frosted glass door labeled "Robert O'Malley, Head of Airport Operations." "I'm not leaving him alone," Dr. Ramirez stated firmly. "I've witnessed this entire incident and intend to provide my statement." "Same here," Kevin Rodriguez added. As the Atlantic Sky employee who initially verified his documentation, "I need to be part of this discussion." Patterson looked like he wanted to object, but thought better of it. Fine. But the recording stops now, he said, eyeing Samantha Taylor's phone. Actually, Samantha replied, lowering her device but not turning it off. I'm a credentialed journalist with the International Travel Media Association, and I'll continue documenting until Mr. Wilson expressly asks me to stop. She looked to Marcus, who gave a small nod of permission. He wanted witnesses. He wanted documentation. He'd seen too many stories where the truth became malleable once doors closed and power imbalances reasserted themselves. The door opened, revealing Robert O'Malley, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and the weary eyes of someone who had seen decades of airport crises. Beside him stood a younger man with a military bearing, wearing a suit with a TSA executive security badge partially visible inside his jacket. Special Agent Thomas Woodward, TSA Oversight Division. The younger man introduced himself, his expression unreadable. I was already on site for a routine inspection when this incident was escalated to Level 3 priority. The presence of TSA Oversight, the Internal Affairs Division of Transportation Security, elevated the situation beyond a simple misunderstanding. This was now officially a potential civil rights incident under federal transportation jurisdiction. O'Malley's gaze immediately fixed on Marcus, taking in his appearance, the red marks on his wrists, and the small entourage behind him. Marcus Wilson, he asked, his voice carrying the strained politeness of someone navigating a potential catastrophe. Yes, sir, Marcus confirmed, maintaining the composed demeanor his parents had instilled in him for precisely these kinds of interactions. Please come in. Your father is still on the line. Marcus nodded toward Patterson, who still held his phone. Good. I'd like to speak with him as well. O'Malley stepped aside, allowing Marcus to enter, then addressed the others. Dr. Ramirez, Mr. Rodriguez, and Ms. Taylor, is it? Please wait here. Agent Woodward will take your statements separately. Inside the office, a stark contrast to the institutional corridor, O'Malley gestured for Marcus to take a seat in a leather chair. The walls were lined with framed awards and aerial photographs of O'Hare through the decades. A large monitor displayed the airport's operations dashboard, dozens of flights tracked in real-time security incident logs, weather patterns, and staffing allocations. Mr. Wilson O'Malley began speaking to the phone Patterson had placed on the desk. This is Robert O'Malley. First, let me express my profound apologies for this situation. I want to assure you that I'm personally handling this matter and will ensure your son is treated with the utmost respect. The time for assurances was before my son was put in handcuffs. Robert Lawrence's voice came through the speaker, controlled but glacial. Right now, I need facts. Who authorized this? What protocols were cited? And why was my 17-year-old son paraded through your terminal like a criminal? O'Malley straightened in his chair. I'm gathering the complete details now. But the initial report indicates Gate Agent Matthews questioned the validity of Marcus's first-class upgrade. When he maintained that his ticket was legitimate, she perceived his persistence as confrontational and called security and the handcuffs. What justification was provided for physically restraining a minor who presented no threat? O'Malley glanced uncomfortably at Officers Patterson and Riley, who stood stiffly by the door. Standard protocol when a subject is reported as non-compliant is to secure them before removal from a crowded area. Non-compliant Lawrence repeated the two words, dripping with contempt. My son was non-compliant because he didn't accept being falsely accused of fraud, because he dared to insist his legitimate ticket was in fact legitimate. Sir, I understand your frustration. No, Robert, you don't. You cannot possibly understand what it means to know your child has been handcuffed for simply existing in a space someone decided he didn't belong in. But you will understand the consequences of this incident. I'll be landing in approximately 60 minutes. In the meantime, I expect my son to be treated with dignity The gate agent and security officers to be suspended, pending investigation, and Flight 1387 to remain at the gate until I arrive. The flight is already being held, sir. As for the suspensions, O'Malley hesitated, glancing at Agent Woodward, who gave a barely perceptible nod. That wasn't a suggestion, Robert Lawrence clarified. Either those responsible are suspended immediately, or you can explain to the board why you chose to protect employees who handcuffed the CEO's son for attempting to board a flight with a valid ticket. The implied threat hung in the air, crystalline in its clarity. O'Malley nodded slowly. I understand, Mr. Wilson. Consider it done. Good. Now I'd like a moment with my son. O'Malley stood, gesturing for the officers to follow him out. We'll give you some privacy. Marcus, if you need anything at all, I'll be just outside. When the door closed, leaving Marcus alone in the quiet office, he felt some of his carefully maintained composure begin to crumble. The adrenaline that had carried him through the public confrontation was ebbing, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a tangle of emotions he could barely identify. Dad, he said quietly. I'm here, son, Lawrence replied, his voice softening for the first time since the crisis began. Are you really okay? Marcus swallowed hard. Yeah. I mean, physically, I'm fine. The handcuffs left some marks, but nothing serious. He paused. It was just so public. Everyone was watching, recording. Even after they knew who I was, who you are, they still led me away in handcuffs. Listen to me, Marcus, Lawrence said, and something in his tone made Marcus sit up straighter. What happened to you today was wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong, and it would have been equally wrong if you were the son of a janitor instead of a CEO. The fact that you're my son just means you have resources and protection that others in your situation wouldn't have. I know, Marcus replied softly, thinking of how differently this might have ended for someone without his family's connections and influence. And that's why this can't just be about getting you on that flight or disciplining a few employees. This has to be about ensuring this doesn't happen to anyone else's child. Do you understand? Marcus nodded, then remembered his father couldn't see him. Yes, I understand. Outside the office, a confrontation was brewing. Brenda Matthews had arrived escorted by a nervous-looking supervisor. Her face, initially set in defensive confidence, faltered slightly when she saw Kevin Rodriguez standing with Dr. Ramirez and Samantha Taylor. What is he doing here? She demanded, pointing at Kevin. He undermined security protocols and interfered with a legitimate passenger verification. Kevin stood his ground. I verified Marcus Wilson's documentation, according to Atlantic Sky procedures. You escalated against protocol, and without cause. Without cause? Brenda's voice rose. A teenager with a chairman's circle upgrade doesn't trigger any red flags for you. In 15 years at this gate, I've learned to spot fraud attempts. What exactly did you spot? Ms. Matthews, Dr. Ramirez asked quietly. What specific red flags did Marcus Wilson present that warranted security intervention? The question hung in the air, its implication unmistakable. Before Brenda could respond, the door to O'Malley's office opened, and Agent Woodward stepped out. Ms. Matthews, he said, his tone professional but cold, I'll need your statement next. Please be prepared to cite the specific security directives and Atlantic Sky protocols you invoked during this incident. Brenda's confident demeanor cracked further. I was following standard procedures for suspicious ticket verification. There are no standard procedures for determining which passengers look suspicious, Woodward replied. There are only documented protocols for responding to specific security threats. I'll be interested to hear which threat category you assign to a 17-year-old honor student with valid documentation. As Marcus ended the call with his father, he felt a strange calm settling over him. The humiliation and anger remained, but alongside them grew something new, a sense of purpose, a determination that this experience, painful as it was, would become a catalyst for change, rather than just another story of injustice that faded once the initial outrage passed. He looked around O'Malley's office at the awards and photographs, celebrating decades of aviation achievements. Somewhere in this same building, perhaps along these same corridors, his father had once walked as a young executive, building the airline that now bore their name. Marcus had grown up hearing stories of the barriers Lawrence had broken, the prejudices he'd overcome, the systems he'd changed from within. Now it seemed it was his turn to continue that work, not by choice, but by necessity. Because what had happened at Gate C-18 wasn't just about a boarding pass or a first-class seat. It was about who gets questioned and who passes unnoticed, who belongs without explanation, and who must constantly justify their presence. And that was a problem much bigger than one afternoon at O'Hare International Airport. At 37,000 feet above Pennsylvania, Lawrence Wilson sat alone in the main cabin of his Gulfstream G650, the luxury surrounding him, hand-stitched leather seats, polished walnut surfaces, the discreet attentiveness of the flight crew standing in stark contrast to the storm raging within him. On the screen of his tablet, a social media video played silently, his son handcuffs glinting under airport lights, being led away from Gate C-18. The footage had been shared thousands of times already, sparking outrage across platforms. Justice for Marcus was trending nationally. Hatch Atlantic Sky. Shame followed close behind. Lawrence closed the video, unable to watch it again. Each viewing was like a physical blow, a visceral reminder of his failure to protect his son from exactly the kind of humiliation he'd spent years warning him about. He opened a private message from Catherine. "This is what happens when we prioritize changing systems over holding them accountable. Our son is paying the price for your gradualism." The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because part of him feared she was right. Had his corporate approach to fighting discrimination been too cautious, too compromising? Had his belief in transformation from within been naive? Lawrence opened his secure messaging app and typed instructions to Lisa Parker, Atlantic Sky's chief legal counsel. Priority: gather all documentation relating to incident at O'Hare Gate C-18 today. Employee records for Brenda Matthews going back 5 years. Security footage from all terminal cameras covering the incident area. Witness statements. All communication between gate agent and security. Prepare for potential legal action against individuals involved. Lisa's response came seconds later, already underway. PR team standing by for your statement. Board members requesting emergency briefing. Michael Donovan, CFO, specifically concerned about stock impact, already down 4.3% since incident began trending. Lawrence's jaw tightened. The board could wait. Donovan definitely could wait. This wasn't a PR crisis to be managed with carefully crafted statements and strategic settlements. It was a moment of moral reckoning for the company he'd built. His thoughts drifted to a memory from Marcus's childhood. 8-year-old Marcus, wide-eyed and innocent, asking Dad, "Why does your plane have your name on it?" Lawrence had laughed, explaining that the company name, not his personal name, was on the aircraft. But now the question took on new meaning. His name, the Wilson name, was indeed on every plane, every uniform, every piece of Atlantic Sky's corporate identity. And today, that name hadn't protected his son. Instead, it had been dismissed as an impossible claim, a presumptuous lie. The irony cut deep. He had built an empire that his own son couldn't safely navigate. The jet began its descent into Chicago, and Lawrence prepared himself for what was to come. This wouldn't be resolved with a few firings or a public apology. This required a fundamental re-examination of the company he'd built. A company that, despite his position at its helm, had failed to create an environment where his own son was treated with basic human dignity. As the Chicago skyline came into view, Lawrence made a silent vow. This would be a turning point, not just for Marcus, not just for Atlantic Sky, but for an industry that had for too long allowed prejudice to hide behind policies and protocols. At the same time, a more personal question gnawed at him. Had he been wrong all these years? Had Catherine's more confrontational approach been right? Tearing down instead of reforming from within? It was a question that would haunt him long after this immediate crisis was resolved. The real journey, the one toward justice and accountability, both public and personal, was just beginning. The walk from the operations center to gate C-18 began in silence. Father and son, moving in tandem through corridors, now mysteriously cleared of the usual airport crowds. Security personnel led the way, while Lisa Parker and Robert O'Malley followed a respectful distance behind their footsteps, echoing on the polished floor. "Your mother's on her way," Lawrence said, breaking the silence. "She's taking the next flight out." Marcus nodded, not surprised. "She's furious, isn't she?" "Beyond furious," Lawrence confirmed. "She's already contacted the ACLU and 3 civil rights organizations. She's building a coalition for a class action lawsuit, even as we speak." A small smile touched Marcus's lips. "That's Mom. She thinks I'm being too soft in my approach," Lawrence admitted. "She wants scorched earth fire, everyone sue the airport press criminal charges." "And you don't?" Lawrence looked at his son directly. "I want justice, but I also want change. Real lasting change. Sometimes burning it all down feels good, but doesn't build anything better." It was an old debate in the Wilson household, Catherine's righteous legal crusades versus Lawrence's corporate reformism. 2 different approaches to the same goal, a world where their son could exist without being presumed guilty of something. "What do you want?" Marcus Lawrence asked the question, carrying more weight than usual. "This happened to you. Your voice matters most here." Marcus considered this carefully. "I want both. I want accountability for what happened today, but I also want to make sure it doesn't happen to someone else tomorrow." Lawrence nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his son's balanced approach. "Like your mother's fire and my practicality combined." They approached a small alcove near a bank of silent departure screens, momentarily away from prying eyes. Lawrence stopped, turning to face his son directly. "Before we go out there, I need to know, truly know, how you're doing. Not what you're showing the world, but what's happening inside." His voice softened. "This is me asking, not the CEO, not the public figure. Just your father." Marcus's carefully maintained facade wavered slightly. He looked down at his wrists, at the marks that would fade from his skin, but perhaps never from his memory. "I'm angry," he admitted, his voice low. "Not just at her or the security officers, at the whole situation. At having to be so perfect. At knowing that if I had raised my voice or argued too strongly or shown any real emotion, it would have justified everything they thought about me." Lawrence nodded, recognizing the burden his son carried, the same burden he had carried himself, the exhausting vigilance required to navigate spaces not designed with you in mind. "I'm also—" Marcus hesitated, searching for the right word. "Disappointed. I know you've worked so hard to build Atlantic Sky, to create these policies and training programs. And still, this happened. On your airline, to your son." The words struck Lawrence like physical blows, each one landing precisely on target. Because Marcus was right. All his power, all his wealth, all his carefully constructed systems hadn't protected his son from this fundamental injustice. "You have every right to those feelings," Lawrence said finally. "Every right to be angry, to be disappointed. What happened today was wrong on every level. And you're right. All my work, all our family's success didn't shield you from it." He paused, a rare moment of vulnerability crossing his face. "And that's something I have to reckon with. I've spent your lifetime building a company acquiring influence, accumulating the trappings of success, telling myself it was all to create a better world for you. Today showed me how incomplete that work has been. Marcus looked up, surprised by his father's candor. Lawrence Wilson was known for his strategic thinking and measured responses, not for public soul-searching. "Mom always says you can't reform a broken system," Marcus observed quietly. "You have to replace it." Lawrence sighed. "And I've always believed you have to work from both inside and outside. Maybe we're both right. Maybe we're both wrong. Or maybe it takes both approaches," Marcus suggested. "Mom's righteous anger and your strategic positioning." Lawrence smiled slightly, pride momentarily displacing his guilt. "When did you get so wise?" "I've had good teachers," Marcus replied. "Both of you." As they stepped back into the corridor, resuming their journey to Gate C-18, there was a subtle but significant shift in their dynamic. They moved not just as father and son, but as allies, in a cause larger than their personal experience, partners in a moment that would transcend the personal humiliation and become something transformative. The sleek Gulfstream G650, bearing the Atlantic Sky logo, touched down on runway 10L at O'Hare with a screech of tires and a palpable sense of urgency. He didn't wait for the stairs to be fully deployed before he was striding down the aisle, his face a thunderous mask of fury. Sarah Miller, his ever-efficient assistant, followed closely behind, her own expression grim. He was met on the tarmac by a visibly shaken Robert O'Malley and a phalanx of airport security personnel. O'Malley began to offer a rushed explanation, but Lawrence waved him off. His eyes laser-focused on one thing: his son. "Where is he?" Lawrence's voice was low and dangerous, the kind of quiet fury that was far more intimidating than any shouting. O'Malley stammered, "He's in the security office, sir. We had the handcuffs removed immediately once we realized." Lawrence didn't wait for him to finish. He turned and strode purposefully through the terminal, O'Malley and the security detail scrambling to keep up. He knew exactly where the security office was, a nondescript room he had visited countless times during his years at the helm of the airline, usually to deal with far less personal crises. He burst into the small, sterile room without knocking. Marcus was sitting at the metal table, his face pale, the red marks on his wrists a stark testament to his ordeal. Officer Miller and Officer Riley stood awkwardly in the corner, their expressions a mixture of relief and apprehension. Marcus Lawrence's voice, though still tight with anger, softened with immediate paternal concern as he saw his son. Marcus looked up, his eyes welling with relief. "Dad." He stood up quickly, and Lawrence enveloped him in a tight hug, a silent reassurance that the ordeal was finally over. Lawrence pulled back, his gaze hardening as he looked at the officers. "Who authorized the use of handcuffs on my son?" Officer Miller stepped forward hesitantly. "Sir, it was protocol. The gate agent reported he was being disruptive and uncooperative." Disruptive? Lawrence's voice dripped with scorn. "My son, an honor student with a spotless record, was being disruptive because he dared to question being wrongly accused and racially profiled for having a first-class ticket my own company issued. Is that your protocol?" The officers remained silent, shifting uncomfortably under his intense gaze. "Where is she?" Lawrence demanded, turning to O'Malley, who had just entered the room. "Where is Brenda Matthews?" O'Malley swallowed hard. "She's waiting in my office, sir." "Good." Lawrence set his jaw tight. "I'll deal with her shortly. For now, I want those officers to file a full incident report detailing every aspect of this disgraceful episode, and I want a copy on my desk within the hour. Is that understood?" The officers nodded quickly. Lawrence then turned back to Marcus, his anger replaced by a deep, unwavering concern. "Are you all right, son? Did they hurt you?" Marcus shook his head. "Just humiliated, Dad." Lawrence put a comforting hand on his son's shoulder. I know, son. I know. This should never have happened. He looked at O'Malley. Ground flight, 1387. Indefinitely. Robert, I will personally address the passengers and arrange for a company-wide email to go out immediately. As they left the security office, Lawrence's mind was racing. This wasn't just about a single prejudiced gate agent. This was about the culture within his own airline, a culture that had allowed such a blatant act of discrimination to occur. This was about the responsibility he carried as CEO to ensure that every passenger, regardless of their race or background, was treated with respect and dignity. The reckoning had begun, and Brenda Matthews was just the first domino to fall. The boarding area for Flight 1387 had transformed into an impromptu town hall, with passengers seated or standing in a loose semicircle facing the gate desk. The atmosphere crackled with a mixture of anticipation, frustration, and curiosity. After more than 2 hours of delay, the travelers, a diverse cross-section of business professionals, families, and solo adventurers, watched warily as Lawrence Wilson approached the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying clearly throughout the space. My name is Lawrence Wilson. I am the CEO and founder of Atlantic Sky Airlines. First, I want to apologize sincerely for the significant delay in your flight today. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some passengers nodded in acknowledgement, while others checked watches or phones with visible irritation. I know many of you have connections to make, meetings to attend, or loved ones waiting in San Francisco. The disruption to your schedules is substantial, and for that, I am truly sorry. An older businessman in the front row spoke up, unable to contain his frustration. With all due respect, Mr. Wilson, we've been sitting here for over 2 hours with minimal information. Some of us are missing crucial connections. Will Atlantic Sky be compensating us for this delay? The question, direct and focused on personal inconvenience rather than the larger issue, created a moment of tension. Lawrence could have easily deflected it or made a quick promise of vouchers to placate the man. Instead, he chose a different approach. Sir, your question is completely valid, Lawrence acknowledged. And yes, every passenger on this flight will receive appropriate compensation for the delay. But I'd like to explain why this delay was necessary, because some things are more important than on-time departure percentages. He gestured for Marcus to join him. Father and son stood side by side, the resemblance between them now strikingly obvious. The same determined set of their shoulders, the same intelligent eyes, the same inherent dignity. 2 hours ago, my son Marcus attempted to board this flight and was instead detained, handcuffed, and led away by security. Lawrence continued. His crime: presenting a valid first-class ticket that someone decided couldn't possibly belong to him. The blunt assessment hung in the air, uncomfortable but undeniable. Some passengers who had witnessed the incident nodded in recognition, while others looked surprised or confused. From the back of the crowd, a sharp voice cut through the murmurs. Typical liberal virtue signaling, holding up an entire flight for a PR moment. Heads turned to locate the source of the comment, a well-dressed man in his late 50s, his expensive suit and commanding presence, marking him as someone accustomed to authority. A few passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably away from him. Lawrence recognized him immediately. James Peterson, CEO of rival carrier Sky Global Airlines. Their companies had been locked in fierce competition for years, with Peterson publicly criticizing Atlantic Sky's diversity initiatives as political correctness at the expense of business fundamentals. Mr. Peterson, Lawrence acknowledged with a nod. I didn't realize you were traveling with us today. Market research, Peterson replied with a thin smile. Though I must say, a 2-hour delay for what should have been a simple verification issue seems excessive. My airline prioritizes on-time performance for all passengers. The tension in the gate area thickened. Peterson's presence wasn't coincidental. He was clearly looking to exploit the situation. What happened today wasn't a verification issue, Mr. Peterson Lawrence replied evenly. It was a fundamental failure of respect and dignity. And yes, I consider that worth delaying a flight for. A murmur of agreement rose from several passengers. An elderly black woman near the front spoke up, her voice carrying the weight of decades of similar experiences. I've been flying for 60 years, she said. Been questioned, moved, overlooked more times than I can count. It's about time an airline took this seriously instead of sweeping it under the rug. Peterson wasn't finished. Noble sentiments, Wilson. But I wonder how your shareholders feel about your social justice campaign eating into quarterly profits. Before Lawrence could respond, a young woman in business attire stood up. I am a shareholder, she stated firmly, and I'd rather invest in a company that stands for something beyond just profit margins. Several passengers applauded. Peterson's attempt to turn sentiment against Lawrence had backfired, but the flash of calculation in his eyes suggested this wasn't his last move in what was clearly becoming a public relations chess match. Lawrence handed the microphone to Marcus, whose composed demeanor belied the magnitude of the moment. I'm Marcus Wilson, he began, his voice steady. I'm 17 years old. I'm headed to Stanford University for a summer coding program. And earlier today, I was handcuffed and detained for trying to board this flight with a valid first-class ticket. He paused, letting the simple facts resonate. I've been taught my whole life that this might happen, that I would need to be twice as polite, twice as patient, twice as composed as anyone else in the same situation, that I would be judged not just by my actions, but by centuries of stereotypes and assumptions. Marcus glanced at his father before continuing. What happened to me today was wrong, but what makes it truly unacceptable is that it happens every day to people who don't have a father who can land a private jet and demand accountability. People whose stories don't go viral. People who are left to deal with the humiliation and injustice alone. Peterson's expression had hardened, but he remained silent, clearly recognizing that any further interruption would only damage his image. As the boarding process finally began, Lawrence noticed Peterson on his phone, speaking intently with someone. The rival CEO caught Lawrence's eye and offered a cold smile before turning away. Lawrence knew instinctively that this confrontation was just the beginning. Peterson's presence here wasn't coincidental. He was gathering ammunition, positioning himself as the voice of business reason against what he would undoubtedly frame as Atlantic Sky's emotional overreaction. What had begun as a personal injustice was rapidly expanding into something larger, an industry-wide battle over values, priorities, and the very definition of good business. And James Peterson had just positioned himself as the champion of the old guard, the defender of the status quo that had allowed incidents like today's to occur without consequence. The battle lines were being drawn, and they extended far beyond Gate C-18. The expansive boardroom on the top floor of Atlantic Sky's New York headquarters buzzed with tense energy as executives filed in for the emergency meeting called by Lawrence Wilson. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, but no one was admiring the vista today. All eyes were fixed on the empty chair at the head of the polished mahogany table, waiting for the CEO who had just landed from Chicago. Michael Donovan, the company's CFO, checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The stock's down 7 points since the video went viral, he murmured to Eleanor Valdez, head of human resources, who sat beside him, reviewing documents on her tablet. That's nearly $400 million in market cap, evaporated in one afternoon. 7 points is nothing compared to what we're really facing, Eleanor replied without looking up. This isn't just a PR crisis. It's an existential moment for the company. Thomas Reynolds, chairman of the board, paced near the Windows phone pressed to his ear as he attempted to reassure a major institutional investor. Yes, I understand your concerns. No, we don't yet have a complete statement, but Lawrence is... Yes, I'm aware of the social media situation. The door opened, and Lawrence Wilson entered, followed by Lisa Parker. The room immediately fell silent. Lawrence took his seat, placing a single folder on the table before him. Thank you all for assembling on such short notice. He began, his voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent of steel. As you're aware, earlier today, at O'Hare International Airport, my son Marcus was wrongfully detained and handcuffed while attempting to board Flight 1487 to San Francisco. He opened the folder, revealing printed screenshots of social media posts about the incident. The public response is substantial and growing. #Justice. For Marcus has been shared over 5 million times. Major news networks are covering the story. Civil rights organizations are calling for boycotts. Michael Donovan cleared his throat. Lawrence, I've prepared a draft statement addressing the incident. We acknowledge the error, offer appropriate compensation to your son, announce the termination of the employee involved, and emphasize our commitment to our existing diversity training program. Our PR team believes this measured response will allow us to contain the situation. While Michael Lawrence interrupted, if your next words include contain the situation, I suggest you reconsider. This isn't a problem to be managed away. It's a fundamental failure that demands a complete reevaluation of who we are as a company. Donovan's face flushed slightly. With all due respect, Lawrence, we have shareholders to consider. The financial implications of an extended controversy. The financial implications of ignoring the root problem would be far worse, Lawrence countered. This isn't just about what happened to Marcus. It's about a culture that made such an incident possible in the first place. Thomas Reynolds interjected, his tone conciliatory but firm. Lawrence, no one is suggesting we ignore the problem, but there are established protocols for handling these situations. A carefully worded statement, appropriate disciplinary action, perhaps a donation to a relevant cause. These approaches have served other companies well in similar circumstances. Lawrence's gaze sharpened. Similar circumstances. My son was placed in handcuffs for attempting to board one of our planes with a valid ticket. That's not a circumstance to be managed, Thomas. It's a symptom of a diseased culture that we've allowed to fester. Eleanor Valdez nodded in agreement. I've been reviewing our incident reports for the past 3 years. There's a pattern of similar complaints, mostly from minority passengers, most resolved with perfunctory apologies or modest compensation. Nothing systemic was ever addressed. And that ends today, Lawrence stated. He turned to the company's chief operating officer. James, I want every frontline employee, every gate agent, flight attendant, customer service representative to undergo new bias training within 30 days. Not the checkbox version we've been doing, but substantive education with real accountability measures. James Chen. The COO frowned slightly. Lawrence, that's over 18,000 customer-facing employees across 87 airports. The logistical challenges alone are enormous. We'd need to adjust scheduling, possibly delay some routes to accommodate the training rotation. Do it, Lawrence said firmly. If that impacts our on-time performance metrics, so be it. This takes priority. Our Q3 performance bonuses are largely tied to those metrics, Donovan pointed out. The board approved that structure last quarter. Then the board can approve a revision, Lawrence replied, looking directly at Reynolds. Unless maintaining arbitrary performance metrics is more important than ensuring our employees don't humiliate teenage passengers. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. It's not that simple, Lawrence. We have fiduciary responsibilities to our shareholders. The compensation structure is part of our SEC filings. There are regulatory considerations. There are also moral considerations, Lawrence cut in. and today they take precedence. He turned to Eleanor. I want a complete overhaul of our hiring and promotion practices. Diversity isn't just about who we hire. It's about who we listen to, who we promote, who shapes our policies. I've already drafted preliminary recommendations, Eleanor replied. They include blind resume reviews, diverse interview panels, and mentorship programs specifically designed to support employees of color in leadership tracks. Michael Donovan shifted uncomfortably. These initiatives will be expensive. The training alone could cost millions, not to mention the potential revenue loss from schedule adjustments and operational disruptions. Lawrence fixed him with a steady gaze. Michael, I understand your concern for the bottom line. That's your job. But let me be absolutely clear. I am prepared to sacrifice short-term profits for long-term integrity. If some shareholders aren't comfortable with that priority, they're welcome to invest elsewhere. The blunt statement sent a ripple through the room. Lawrence Wilson wasn't just the CEO. He was the founder and majority shareholder. His vision had built Atlantic Sky, and his authority within the company was nearly absolute. Now Lawrence continued, I want to announce the creation of the Marcus Wilson Initiative for Inclusion and Equity, a $50 million commitment over 5 years to address systemic bias in the airline industry and beyond. The amount caused several executives to exchange glances. $50 million was significant even for a company of Atlantic Sky's size. Reynolds leaned forward, his expression grave. Lawrence, while I sympathize with your position as a father, I must speak as chairman of the board. A unilateral commitment of that magnitude requires board approval. There are governance protocols. I'm not asking for board approval, Thomas Lawrence replied calmly. I'm informing you of my decision. The $50 million will come from 3 sources: a reallocation of our existing CSR budget, a reduction in executive bonuses, including my own, and a personal contribution from my family foundation. The room fell silent as the executives processed this statement. Lawrence had effectively bypassed the board's authority by structuring the initiative in a way that didn't require their formal approval. The initiative will have 3 main components, Lawrence explained. First, scholarships for underrepresented students pursuing careers in aviation and technology. Second, partnerships with civil rights organizations to develop industry-wide anti-discrimination standards. And third, an internal accountability system with real consequences for policy violations. Lisa Parker spoke up for the first time. I've begun drafting the legal framework for the initiative. It will include transparent reporting of incidents, regular third-party audits, and a passenger advocacy board with actual authority to recommend policy changes. Lawrence nodded in approval, then addressed the marketing director. Sarah, I want a public announcement of these changes, not a carefully sanitized corporate statement, but an honest acknowledgement of our failure and a concrete plan for correction. What about the immediate crisis management? Sarah asked. The story is still evolving. Marcus's video has been shared millions of times. The best crisis management is genuine change, Lawrence replied. We're not going to spin this or wait for it to blow over. We're going to transform it into a catalyst for something better. He stood, signaling that the discussion was moving toward conclusion. I built this airline on a promise that every passenger would be treated with dignity and respect. Today, we failed to keep that promise to my own son. I take that failure personally, not just as Marcus's father, but as the person ultimately responsible for the culture that allowed it to happen. His gaze swept the room, making eye contact with each executive. Some of you may see this as an overreaction to a single incident. It is not. It is a long overdue response to a systemic problem. And if anyone in this room cannot fully commit to the changes we're about to implement, I invite you to tender your resignation now, with no hard feelings and a generous severance package. The silence that followed was profound. No one moved. Good, Lawrence said with a nod. Then let's get to work. Eleanor. I want a complete review of all discrimination complaints from the past 5 years on my desk by tomorrow. Lisa, draft the legal framework for the initiative. James, begin restructuring schedules for the training program. Michael, prepare a financial impact analysis of our new commitments. As the executives filed out purpose in their steps and a new understanding of priorities clear in their expressions, Thomas Reynolds remained behind. Lawrence. He said once they were alone, I need to be direct with you. While I personally support what you're trying to accomplish, several board members have expressed concerns about your handling of this situation. They feel you're letting personal emotions drive business decisions. Lawrence's expression hardened. They're right, Thomas. I am letting my emotions drive this decision, specifically my outrage that a company bearing my name treated my son like a criminal for trying to board a flight with a valid ticket. If that makes some board members uncomfortable, so be it. It's not that simple, Reynolds insisted. There's already talk of an emergency board meeting to discuss your leadership during this crisis. Some members are questioning whether you can be objective given your personal involvement. Let them question. Lawrence replied, his tone resolute. Let them call their meeting, and when they do, they can explain to me and to the public why maintaining the status quo is more important than ensuring basic human dignity for our passengers. Reynolds studied him for a moment, recognizing the immovable determination in his old friend's expression. This could get messy, Lawrence. It's already messy, Thomas. The question is whether we're willing to clean it up properly or just sweep it under the rug. Lawrence gathered his papers, preparing to leave. I've made my choice. As Reynolds watched Lawrence depart, he knew that Atlantic Sky Airlines stood at a crossroads. The path Lawrence had chosen would not be easy. It would be expensive, disruptive, and possibly even threatening to his own position. But it was also unmistakably the right path. The only question was whether the rest of the company would follow where Lawrence Wilson was determined to lead. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel Chicago glittered with carefully curated elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over round tables, draped in midnight blue linens, each centered with arrangements of white orchids and silver accents. A stage dominated the front of the room, flanked by large screens displaying the newly designed logo of the Marcus Wilson Opportunity Initiative, a stylized aircraft silhouette surrounding a rising sun. It had been exactly 2 months since the incident at O'Hare, and Lawrence Wilson stood at the podium surveying the assembled guests, industry leaders, civil rights advocates, education specialists, and Atlantic Sky executives, all gathered for the official launch of the initiative that bore his son's name. Good evening. Lawrence began, his voice carrying easily through the state-of-the-art sound system. Thank you all for being here for what I believe marks the beginning of something truly transformative, not just for Atlantic Sky Airlines, but for our industry as a whole. He paused, making eye contact with Marcus, who sat at the front table alongside his mother, Catherine Wilson, who had flown in from New York for the occasion. 2 months ago, my son Marcus was wrongfully detained, handcuffed, and humiliated while attempting to board one of our flights. His crime: being a young black man in a space where someone decided he didn't belong. The room fell completely silent, the collective focus almost palpable. From his seat, Marcus observed the proceedings with a complex mixture of emotions. 2 months ago, he had been a high school student excited about a coding camp. Now he was the namesake of a multi-million-dollar initiative. The weight of this responsibility sat heavily on his shoulders, not unwelcome, but unexpected and profound. Just as Lawrence was about to continue, the ballroom doors opened. James Peterson, CEO of Sky Global Airlines, strode in, with deliberate timing, flanked by 2 executives, and a woman Marcus recognized as a prominent conservative commentator. Their late entrance clearly calculated to disrupt drew all eyes in the room. Lawrence paused only momentarily before continuing. That incident, painful as it was, exposed failures that went far beyond a single gate agent or a single moment. It revealed systemic issues that had persisted despite our stated commitments to equality and respect. As he outlined the initiative's ambitious scope, Peterson took a seat at a table near the back, his expression one of polite skepticism that barely masked his contempt. Lawrence gestured to the screens as they shifted to display data visualizations, statistics on diversity in aviation charts, showing complaint patterns, graphs, illustrating disparities in industry leadership. The numbers tell a clear story. He continued, despite progress in recent decades, aviation remains one of the least diverse industries in America, particularly in leadership and technical roles. Less than 3% of commercial pilots are Black, less than 5% of aerospace engineers, less than 7% of airline executives. The screens shifted again, showing images of classrooms, training facilities, and professional development programs. The Marcus Wilson Opportunity Initiative represents a $50 million commitment over 5 years to change these statistics, not through token gestures or symbolic appointments, but through substantive investments in education, training, mentorship, and accountability. Catherine Wilson watched the presentation with a complex mixture of pride and lingering anger. The attorney in her had wanted to sue to create legal precedent that would force change through the courts. But seeing the scope of what Lawrence had created, a systemic approach to transformation, rather than just punishment, she found herself reconsidering her initial reaction. Dr. Gabriela Ramirez took the podium, her presence commanding immediate respect. Thank you, Lawrence. When I witnessed what happened to Marcus 2 months ago, I never imagined it would lead to this moment. But that's the nature of transformation. It often begins in places of pain and injustice. She outlined the specific programs already underway: a scholarship fund for 100 students annually, a mentorship network pairing industry veterans with emerging talents, and partnerships with historically Black colleges and universities to strengthen their aviation and technology programs. As the program continued, Peterson was spotted texting rapidly on his phone, his expression darkening. The next morning, the reason became clear. Sky Global had issued a press release announcing its own merit-based aviation excellence program, with Peterson quoted as saying, "While others focus on identity politics, Sky Global remains committed to selecting the best candidates, regardless of background. True equality means focusing on qualifications, not quotas." The thinly veiled attack was just the beginning. Over the next year, Peterson would emerge as the initiative's most vocal critic, positioning himself as the defender of traditional excellence against what he characterized as Atlantic Sky's woke agenda. What had begun as a personal incident was evolving into an industry-wide ideological battle with the Marcus Wilson Initiative at its center. Peterson's opposition, though frustrating, actually helped galvanize support from those who recognized the importance of the work, creating an unexpected clarity about the values at stake. As Marcus later observed to his father, "Peterson's done us a favor. He's made it impossible for companies to stay neutral. They either stand with us for change, or they stand with him for the status quo." Lawrence nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the clearest path forward requires an equally clear opponent. The Stanford University campus basked in the golden glow of California late afternoon sun as Marcus Wilson made his way across the quad toward the computer science building. 6 weeks had passed since the incident at O'Hare, and while the physical marks of the handcuffs had long faded, the experience had left different kinds of impressions, some painful, others unexpectedly constructive. The coding camp had turned out to be everything Marcus had hoped for intellectually. The curriculum was challenging, the instructors world-class, and his fellow students brilliant and diverse. What he hadn't anticipated was how his unexpected notoriety would follow him even here in this sanctuary of learning. As he entered the computer science building, Marcus noticed a security guard watching him with unusual attention. When he reached for his student ID badge to scan into the secure lab area, the guard stepped forward. "Excuse me, I need to see your camp credentials," the guard said, despite Marcus already holding his official Stanford visitor badge clearly visible. "It's right here," Marcus replied, keeping his voice level as he held up the badge. "I scan in every day." The guard studied the badge with exaggerated care. "We've had some reports of unauthorized access. Protocol requires additional verification for after-hours entry." Marcus checked his watch. It was 4:30 p.m. Nowhere near after hours for a facility that remained open until midnight. Two white students walked past, scanning their badges without being stopped. The parallel to gate C18 was too obvious to ignore. "I understand security concerns," Marcus said carefully, "but I notice you're not asking everyone for additional verification." The guard's expression hardened. "I'm just doing my job." The same phrase Brenda Matthews had used. The same justification for selective scrutiny. Before Marcus could respond, Professor Daniel Rivera approached from down the hall. "Marcus, I was just looking for you. I need your input on the distributed verification protocol for the app." The guard immediately stepped back, his demeanor shifting. "Sorry for the delay, Professor." Rivera, noting the tension, assessed the situation quickly. "Is there a problem, Officer Martinez?" "No problem, sir. Just routine verification." Rivera raised an eyebrow. "Interesting that your routine verification seems to be quite selective in its application." He turned to Marcus. "Let's go to my office. The team is waiting." As they walked away, Rivera spoke quietly. "That's the third time I've seen this happen to students of color in the program. I'm documenting each incident for the department chair." Marcus nodded, the familiar weight of these interactions settling on his shoulders. "It's exactly what my app is designed to address, patterns of routine interactions that aren't routine at all." In Professor Rivera's office, Zoe Patel and Alex Martinez were already waiting, surrounded by whiteboards covered in code snippets and system architecture diagrams. "Marcus, we've been testing the location verification module," Zoe began excitedly. "The GPS-based incident clustering is working beautifully." Marcus set down his backpack and immediately immersed himself in the work, the technical challenges a welcome focus after the interaction with security. "Show me the back-end architecture," he said, moving to the main whiteboard. The app, still unnamed, but taking concrete shape, was designed to be a sophisticated tool for tracking, analyzing, and responding to bias incidents. Its technical architecture had evolved significantly from Marcus's initial concept, a clean, intuitive interface, allowing users to report incidents in real time, with options for anonymous reporting, evidence uploading, and incident categorization. A blockchain-based system that time-stamped and validated reports without compromising user privacy, creating an immutable record that could withstand legal scrutiny. An AI system that identified clusters and patterns in reported incidents by location, employee, company, or type of interaction. A module that created customized intervention recommendations based on incident patterns, designed to help organizations address systemic issues rather than just individual complaints. A powerful analytics tool that transformed raw incident data into actionable insights, showing hotspots, trends, and effectiveness of interventions over time. "I've been thinking about the verification challenge," Marcus said, picking up a marker. "We need to balance user privacy with data integrity. What if we implement a zero-knowledge proof system?" He sketched a complex cryptographic flow diagram, explaining how users could verify incident details without revealing personal information, a crucial feature for protecting those who might face retaliation for reporting. "That's brilliant," Alex said, studying the diagram. "It solves the credibility problem without compromising anonymity." For the next hour, the team delved deep into the technical aspects of the app: user interface, design, data, security, scalability concerns, API integrations. It was during these discussions that Marcus felt most like himself again. Not the CEO's son who was handcuffed, but simply a talented young programmer with ideas worth developing. As they wrapped up, Professor Rivera's tone shifted slightly. Marcus, I don't usually discuss the business aspects of student projects, but your concept has genuine potential beyond this program. Have you thought about how you might actually implement this in the real world? Marcus hesitated. The truth was, he had been thinking about it constantly. My father's initiative has expressed interest in supporting its development. They see it as aligned with their accountability goals. Rivera nodded approvingly. The Marcus Wilson Opportunity Initiative. I've been following its progress. Impressive scope. It's still strange hearing my name attached to something so public, Marcus admitted. You know, Rivera said thoughtfully, sometimes the most important innovations come from personal experience, from identifying a problem, because you've lived it. Your app isn't just technically sound. It addresses a real need. That's what great technology does. It solves human problems. Later that evening, as had become their routine, Marcus video called his parents. Both Lawrence and Catherine appeared on screen, their New York apartment visible in the background. How was your day? Lawrence asked the simple question, carrying the weight of parental concern that had intensified since the incident. Complicated, Marcus replied honestly. I had another random security check at the CS building. Same pattern, white students walked right through. I got stopped. Catherine's expression hardened. Did you document it? Professor Rivera is handling it. He's collecting evidence of a pattern. That's good, Catherine said. But you should still file a formal complaint with the university. Create a paper trail. Lawrence listened quietly, the parallel to Gate C-18 not lost on him. How did you respond? I kept my composure, called out the selective enforcement without escalating, then used the experience to refine the app's pattern recognition algorithm. Marcus smiled slightly, turning the problem into its own solution. Catherine's expression softened with pride. That's my boy. Speaking of the app, Marcus continued, we've made significant progress on the verification architecture. I think we've solved the anonymity versus credibility problem. He explained the technical breakthrough, watching his parents' reactions, his mother focusing on the potential legal applications, his father considering the broader implementation within the initiative. This could be transformative, Lawrence said finally. Not just for aviation, but for any industry where these patterns exist. Which is every industry, Catherine added pointedly. The conversation shifted to updates about the initiative, which was gaining momentum despite or perhaps because of the emerging opposition from James Peterson and his allies. Peterson's launched another attack, Lawrence said, this time claiming our scholarships violate Title VI by supposedly discriminating against white applicants. Let him try to prove that in court. Catherine replied, her attorney mind already formulating counter-arguments. Our program is carefully designed to withstand exactly this kind of challenge. As the call ended, Marcus sat for a moment in the quiet of his dorm room, reflecting on how his world had changed in just a few short weeks. The incident at O'Hare had thrust him into a spotlight he'd never sought, but it had also revealed possibilities he might otherwise never have considered, using his technical skills, not just for innovation's sake, but for creating tools of accountability and change. Tomorrow would bring more coding challenges, more algorithm refinements, more steps toward turning concept into reality. But tonight, Marcus allowed himself to recognize the unique position he now occupied at the intersection of personal experience, technical capability, and a platform for meaningful impact. It wasn't a position he had chosen, but it was one he was increasingly determined to use effectively. The anniversary of the Gate C-18 incident arrived on a crisp autumn morning, marked not by somber reflection, but by the bustling activity of Atlantic Sky's newly renovated training center in Chicago. The facility, once dedicated primarily to technical skills and emergency procedures, had been transformed into a comprehensive education hub where every employee, from pilots to baggage handlers, received ongoing training in customer service, cultural awareness, and bias recognition. Lawrence Wilson stood at the back of a large classroom, observing quietly, as Eleanor Valdez led a session for gate agents and customer service representatives. On the screen at the front of the room, statistical data illustrated the measurable changes implemented over the past year. Formal complaints related to discriminatory treatment down 78%. Employee-initiated interventions in potential bias incidents up 61%. Passenger satisfaction scores among minority travelers increased by 22%. Diversity in new hires and promotions improved across all departments. But more telling than the statistics were the candid discussions taking place throughout the room. Employees sharing experiences, challenging assumptions, and practicing intervention techniques for scenarios drawn from actual incidents in the company's history. The key is not to wait until a situation escalates. Eleanor emphasized to the group, intervention is most effective when it happens early before positions harden and public humiliation occurs. Lawrence nodded in approval. This approach, prevention rather than damage control, represented one of the fundamental shifts in Atlantic Sky's culture over the past year. The company had moved from responding to incidents after they occurred to actively preventing them through education protocols and accountability. After the session concluded, Lawrence made his way to O'Hare's Terminal 3, where Gate C-18, the site of Marcus's detention, had been redesigned as part of a larger terminal renovation. The physical space looked different now, but for Lawrence, it would always carry the weight of what had happened there. However, today's visit wasn't about dwelling on past injustice, but witnessing present transformation. Kevin Rodriguez, now supervisor of passenger advocacy at O'Hare, greeted Lawrence with a firm handshake. The past year had seen Kevin rise rapidly through Atlantic Sky's ranks, his promotion a tangible example of the company's new commitment to recognizing and rewarding ethical leadership. But Lawrence immediately noticed the tension in Kevin's posture. Something was wrong. "How's the new system working?" Lawrence asked as they toured the terminal. "The systems are working well," Kevin replied, his tone carefully measured. "The passenger advocates have intervened in over 200 potential conflict situations in the past 6 months alone. Most passengers don't even realize what's happening. They just know their concerns are being addressed before they escalate." But Lawrence prompted, sensing the unspoken reservation. Kevin hesitated, then spoke frankly. "But there's growing resentment from some of the longer-tenured staff. They're calling us the PC police behind our backs. Some are deliberately creating situations to test us, seeing if they can provoke a response." "And Marcus's app integration?" Lawrence inquired, referring to the reporting platform that had grown from Marcus's Stanford project into a fully implemented system. Kevin's expression tightened slightly. "The app is brilliant technically, but I'm concerned about how it's being implemented. Some advocates are becoming over-reliant on it, treating the algorithm's recommendations as gospel rather than guidance." "Have you discussed this with Marcus?" Kevin looked away briefly. "I've tried, but he's not always receptive to operational feedback. There's a gap between his theoretical understanding and the day-to-day reality of implementation." Lawrence nodded slowly, absorbing this new information. The tension between Kevin and Marcus was unexpected, but perhaps inevitable. The practical implementer versus the theoretical designer, each with valid but different perspectives. "I appreciate your candor, Kevin. These growing pains are part of any systemic change. I'll speak with Marcus about creating a more collaborative feedback loop between the developers and frontline staff." Later that afternoon, Lawrence joined a panel discussion at Northwestern University's Transportation Center, where industry leaders, civil rights advocates, and academic researchers had gathered to discuss the impact of the Marcus Wilson Opportunity Initiative 1 year after its launch. To his surprise, Catherine was already there, having been added to the panel at the last minute. Her presence in Chicago was unexpected. She had her own demanding legal practice in New York, and they hadn't discussed her attending this event. "Catherine." He greeted her with a quick kiss. "I didn't know you were joining the panel." The organizers reached out directly, she explained. They wanted a legal perspective on the initiative's impact. I thought it would be valuable to have both our voices represented. Lawrence nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her presence than professional interest. During the panel, the difference in their approaches became immediately apparent. While Lawrence emphasized the measured progress and cultural shifts within Atlantic Sky, Catherine highlighted the areas where change was still desperately needed across the industry. "The numbers are encouraging," she acknowledged, "but let's not mistake progress for completion. We're seeing cosmetic changes at many airlines. Diversity statements, training programs, public commitments, but the structural inequities remain largely intact." James Peterson, CEO of Sky Global Airlines, was in the audience, his expression smug as he watched the contrast between the Wilsons' approaches play out publicly. After the panel, as they walked to their car, Lawrence broached the subject directly. "You could have told me you were coming, Catherine. We could have coordinated our messaging." "That's exactly why I didn't tell you," she replied frankly. "Your message is important, but so is mine. The initiative needs both approaches, your corporate diplomacy and my legal accountability." "It felt like you were undermining the progress we've made," Lawrence admitted. "I was contextualizing it," Catherine corrected. "Celebrating victories while acknowledging how far we still have to go. That's not undermining. That's honesty." Their discussion was interrupted by a call from Marcus. Lawrence put him on speakerphone. "Dad." "Mom." "Have you seen the news?" Marcus asked, his voice tense. "Peterson just announced a shareholder coalition to challenge our diversity initiatives. He's claiming they violate fiduciary responsibility by prioritizing social experiments over business fundamentals." Lawrence and Catherine exchanged glances. This was a serious escalation in Peterson's campaign against the initiative. "He's been building toward this for months," Lawrence said, "gathering allies, positioning himself as the voice of traditional business values." It's a legally dubious argument, Catherine added, her attorney mind already formulating counter-strategies, but potentially damaging in the court of public opinion. "There's more," Marcus continued. "Kevin Rodriguez contacted me about concerns with the app deployment. He thinks the advocates are using it as a crutch rather than a tool. I told him the data doesn't support his anecdotal observations." Lawrence caught Catherine's eye, noting her raised eyebrow. "Maybe Kevin has a point worth considering, Marcus. He's on the front lines of implementation. The app is data-driven." Marcus replied, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. "If there were implementation issues, the metrics would show it." "Data isn't everything," son Catherine interjected gently. "Sometimes the human experience doesn't fit neatly into algorithms." The call ended with an agreement to reconvene as a family to discuss both Peterson's challenge and the app implementation concerns. As Lawrence and Catherine continued to their hotel, the conversation shifted to Marcus's evolving role. "He's becoming very invested in the technical solution," Catherine observed, "sometimes at the expense of the human element." "He's found his way to contribute," Lawrence replied. "The app is his response to what happened, turning humiliation into innovation." "I know," Catherine agreed. "I just worry that he's using technology to distance himself from the emotional impact of what happened. The app lets him address discrimination as an abstract problem rather than a lived experience." As the day drew to a close, Lawrence reflected on the year that had passed since his son had been handcuffed at gate C-18. The incident had been painful, infuriating, unacceptable, but it had also become a catalyst for transformation, not just within Atlantic Sky, but throughout an industry long overdue for change. Yet new challenges were emerging. Peterson's organized opposition tensions between theoretical solutions and practical implementation, and the complex family dynamics, as each Wilson found their own way to process and respond to what had happened. 1 year after handcuffs had been placed on his son's wrists, the true legacy of that moment was still taking shape, not just in the progress already achieved, but in the work still to be done, the obstacles still to be overcome, and the healing still to be completed. The grand ballroom of the Chicago Convention Center glittered with elegant simplicity, midnight blue linens, silver accents, and strategic lighting that transformed the vast space into something both impressive and intimate. Above the stage, a massive screen displayed the evolution of the Marcus Wilson Initiative logo over the past 5 years, culminating in its current iteration, a stylized aircraft ascending above a globe, surrounded by the words, "Elevating Equity, Transforming Transportation." The annual gala had become one of the most prestigious events in the aviation industry, drawing corporate leaders, civil rights advocates, educators, and alumni of the initiative's various programs. But tonight's 5th anniversary celebration carried special significance, a milestone marking not just the passage of time, but the measurable impact of a vision born from injustice. At precisely 7 o'clock, the lights dimmed, and a spotlight illuminated Marcus Wilson as he took the stage. At 22, he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, his Harvard Law School blazer a nod to his current academic pursuit. The audience rose in spontaneous standing ovation, not for the teenager who had once been wrongfully detained, but for the young leader he had become. 5 years ago, Marcus began once the applause subsided. I stood in handcuffs at Gate C-18 of O'Hare International Airport, accused of attempting to board a flight with a fraudulent ticket. Today, I stand before you as the namesake of an initiative that has transformed not just an airline, but an industry. His gaze swept across the room, taking in the faces of those who had been part of this journey, some from the very beginning, others who had joined along the way. What we're celebrating tonight isn't just the passage of time. It's the power of transformation, the ability to take a moment of injustice and convert it into a movement for equity. The screen behind him shifted to display the initiative's impact metrics: 1024 scholarships awarded, 87% retention rate for program participants entering the aviation industry, 43% increase in diversity among management trainees at partner airlines, 68% reduction in reported bias incidents across participating carriers. These numbers matter, Marcus acknowledged. They represent real people, real opportunities, real change. But equally important are the stories behind the statistics, the individual journeys of determination, excellence, and breakthrough that have defined our community. As if on cue, the spotlight widened to reveal a diverse group of young professionals joining Marcus on stage, the initiative's first full cohort of scholarship recipients, now graduated and working throughout the aviation industry as pilots, engineers, designers, and executives. Sophia Garcia, once the nervous management trainee who had spoken at the one-year panel, now stood confident in her Atlantic Sky executive uniform, having recently been promoted to regional operations manager for the Midwest, the youngest person ever to hold the position. When I received the Marcus Wilson Scholarship 5 years ago, Sophia addressed the audience. I thought it was about financial support for my education. I soon realized it was about so much more: mentorship, opportunity, community, and the chance to be part of reimagining what leadership looks like in aviation. One by one, other alumni shared their stories, not just of professional success, but of becoming agents of change within their respective areas, creating ripple effects that extended far beyond individual careers. From his table near the stage, Lawrence Wilson watched with quiet pride. At 57, he remained an imposing figure in the industry, though the past 5 years had softened some of his edges. The initiative that bore his son's name had become his most meaningful legacy, more significant than the airline he had built, more enduring than the wealth he had accumulated. Eleanor Valdez, now Chief People Officer for Atlantic Sky, leaned over to speak quietly. "You know what impresses me most? It's not just that we've increased diversity in hiring, it's that we've maintained 92% retention of those hires. People aren't just getting in the door, they're staying thriving and advancing." Lawrence nodded, his satisfaction evident. "Because we didn't just change recruitment, we transformed the culture they enter. That was the harder part, and the more important one." After the alumni presentations, Dr. Gabriela Ramirez took the stage to announce the initiative's expansion plans for the coming 5 years, including international partnerships, advanced technology grants, and a new focus on sustainable aviation innovation, led by program graduates. What began as a response to a single incident has evolved into a comprehensive approach to industry transformation, she explained. "We're not just diversifying who sits in the seats of power. We're changing how those seats function and what they're designed to accomplish." The evening continued with recognition of key partners, presentation of achievement awards, and unveiling of a documentary chronicling the initiative's first 5 years. Throughout it all, the atmosphere remained one of purposeful celebration, acknowledging progress, while recommitting to the work still ahead. As dinner concluded, and the formal program neared its end, Lawrence joined Marcus on stage for the final presentation. Father and son stood side by side, their resemblance more pronounced than ever, their shared journey visible in the synchronized rhythm of their movements. 5 years ago, Lawrence began My Son's Humiliation, became public. Today, his leadership has become transformative. While I wish the catalyst had been different, I cannot help but feel profound gratitude for what has grown from that painful moment. He turned to face Marcus directly. "You were just 17 when handcuffs were placed on your wrists for the crime of occupying a space someone decided you didn't belong in. The composure you showed that day was remarkable, but the vision and commitment you've demonstrated in the 5 years since have been truly extraordinary." Marcus accepted his father's words with characteristic grace, then addressed the audience one final time. "When people ask me how I feel about having my name on this initiative, I tell them the truth. At first it was uncomfortable. I didn't want to be defined by what had happened to me. But over time, I've come to see that this work isn't about what happened at Gate C-18. It's about ensuring that such incidents become increasingly rare and eventually unthinkable." He gestured to the graduates seated throughout the room. "The real story isn't what happened to Marcus Wilson. It's what Sofia Garcia is doing to transform regional operations. It's what Miguel Sanchez is accomplishing in aerospace engineering. It's what Taylor Washington is achieving in sustainable fuel development. Their stories, their innovations, their leadership, their impact. That's the true legacy of this initiative." As the formal program concluded, and the evening transitioned to music and mingling, Lawrence found himself approached by Robert O'Malley, the former head of airport operations at O'Hare, who had been present on that fateful day 5 years earlier. Now retired, O'Malley had remained connected to the initiative as an advisor on security protocols. "Remarkable transformation," O'Malley commented, nodding toward the room filled with graduates, industry leaders, and advocates engaged in animated conversation. "When I think back to that day at Gate C-18, who could have imagined this would be the outcome?" Lawrence considered this. "That's the thing about pivotal moments, Robert. Their significance isn't determined by what happens during them, but by what we choose to do afterward." As the evening wound down, Marcus found himself momentarily alone on the balcony, overlooking the Chicago skyline, taking a brief respite from the celebrations. The city lights glittered against the darkness aircraft visible in the distance as they approached O'Hare's runways. Quite a view came a familiar voice as Kevin Rodriguez joined him at the railing. Now, Atlantic Sky's Vice President of Customer Experience. Kevin had risen through the ranks with remarkable speed, his intuitive understanding of human dynamics and ethical leadership making him invaluable to the transformed airline. "It never gets old," Marcus agreed, gesturing toward the aircraft lights. "Knowing that each of those planes represents policies and practices we've helped shape." Kevin nodded. "I think about that day at Gate C-18 sometimes. How differently it could have gone if just one person had made different choices earlier in the sequence." "That's why the intervention training has been so effective," Marcus observed. "Because it equips people to be that one person who interrupts the pattern before it escalates." They stood in companionable silence for a moment. Two men whose lives had been profoundly altered by a chance intersection 5 years earlier. One who had been wrongfully detained, and one who had tried to prevent it. "You know what I'm most proud of," Kevin said finally. "It's not the promotions or the recognition. It's the fact that in 5 years, we haven't had a single incident like what happened to you. Not one passenger in handcuffs for simply occupying space they had every right to be in." Marcus nodded, absorbing the significance of this metric, perhaps the most meaningful measure of the initiative's impact. That's what transformation looks like. Not just changing who's in the room, but changing what happens in the room. As they returned to the gala, Marcus rejoined his father at their table, where Lawrence was engaged in conversation with Dr. Ramirez about the initiative's next phase. The evening was winding down, the celebration transitioning toward conclusion. But the real substantive work of transformation continued its momentum, carrying forward into the years ahead. 5 years after handcuffs had been placed on his wrists, Marcus Wilson had evolved from subject to agent, from victim to catalyst, from a young man defined by what had happened to him, to a leader defined by what he was creating. The journey from Gate C-18 to this moment had been unexpected, challenging, at times painful, but it had also revealed possibilities for change that might otherwise have remained undiscovered. And as he looked around the room, at the hundreds of lives touched, careers launched, and systems transformed, Marcus recognized that this ultimately was the most meaningful response to injustice, not just righting a single wrong, but creating ripples of opportunity that extended far beyond the original impact, transforming a moment of humiliation into a movement for lasting change. The elegant crowd at the gala parted momentarily, revealing a face Marcus hadn't expected to see: Brenda Matthews, standing somewhat apart from the celebration, her expression a complex mixture of apprehension and determination. 5 years had aged her visibly. The authoritative gate agent, who had once wielded policy like a weapon, was now a woman in her early 60s, dressed in a simple navy blue pantsuit, her hair streaked with gray. Marcus felt a momentary tightening in his chest, an echo of that day at Gate C-18, the public humiliation, the cold metal of handcuffs. But alongside that reflexive response came something else: curiosity about what had brought her here to this celebration of an initiative that had grown from her actions. After a moment's hesitation, he approached her, maintaining a measured calm that had become his trademark. "Ms. Matthews," he greeted her, his voice neutral. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight." Brenda's hands fidgeted slightly with the small clutch she carried. "I wasn't sure if I should come," she admitted. "Dr. Ramirez invited me. I've been working with her community outreach program for the past 2 years." This information surprised Marcus. He knew his father had met with Brenda once a year after the incident, but he hadn't been aware of any ongoing connection. "Would you like to sit down?" he offered, gesturing to a quiet corner away from the main celebration. Something told him this conversation shouldn't happen in passing. They settled into 2 chairs, partially screened by a decorative arrangement of plants, creating a small island of privacy within the bustling gala. "I've been following the initiative's progress." Brenda began, her voice steadier now. "The scholarships, the training programs, the policy changes. It's remarkable what's grown from that terrible day." Marcus studied her, trying to gauge her sincerity. "Why are you here, Ms. Matthews?" The directness of the question seemed to catch her off guard, but only momentarily. "I'm here because I owe you something. I should have given you 5 years ago a genuine apology." She met his gaze directly for the first time. Not a corporate statement, not a legal formulation, but a personal acknowledgement of the harm I caused. The moment stretched between them, weighted with history and significance. 5 years ago, I looked at you and made instant judgments based on how you looked, not who you were. Brenda continued. I convinced myself I was following protocol, doing my job. But the truth I've had to face is that I acted from bias, not procedure. And in doing so, I subjected you to humiliation you never deserved. Marcus remained silent, allowing her the space to continue. After I lost my job, I was angry, defensive, convinced I was the victim of political correctness gone wild. A rueful smile crossed her face. It took me almost 2 years to begin to see differently. What changed? Marcus asked, genuinely curious about her journey. Brenda's gaze turned inward, remembering. 6 months after what happened, I tried to get another job in aviation. I'd been in the industry for 22 years. It was all I knew. But no one would hire me. My name had become toxic. She paused, the memory clearly painful. I was broke, desperate. My daughter had to help with my rent. I was angry at everyone, at Atlantic Sky, at your father, at you. I blamed everyone but myself. That must have been difficult, Marcus observed, surprised by his own empathy. It was, Brenda acknowledged. But then something happened that I couldn't ignore. My granddaughter. She was 14, then came home from school in tears. A security guard had followed her and her friends through the mall, then stopped only her for a random bag check. The parallel to Marcus's experience hung in the air between them. When she told me the story, Brenda continued, her voice thick with emotion. I recognized myself in that security guard. The same assumptions, the same selective enforcement, the same certainty that I was just doing my job. She wiped at her eyes discreetly. It broke something in me. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I couldn't keep hiding behind policies and protocols. I had to face what I'd done, not just to you, but to how many others over the years. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding the painful recognition she described. I started volunteering at a community center in my neighborhood, mostly to get out of the house, to be honest. They serve a predominantly Black and immigrant population. Over time, I began to hear stories, so many stories of people being questioned, suspected, excluded from spaces, based on how they looked. Her voice grew softer, and I realized that what I had done to you wasn't an isolated incident or a misunderstanding. It was part of a pattern that happens thousands of times every day, usually without cameras, without CEOs to intervene, without accountability. That kind of self-reflection can't have been easy, Marcus said. It wasn't, Brenda admitted. There were days I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. Days I told myself I was being too hard on myself, that everyone makes mistakes. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just a mistake. It was a revelation of character, my character. She looked down at her hands. 2 years ago, I saw a flyer for Dr. Ramirez's community education program, workshops on recognizing and addressing bias in public accommodations. I almost didn't go, but my granddaughter encouraged me. She said, "Grandma, if you really want to make amends, you have to do more than feel bad." Smart girl, Marcus observed with a small smile. Smarter than her grandmother, that's for sure. Brenda agreed. The first workshop was excruciating. Sitting in a room full of people, mostly people of color, discussing experiences like yours, like my granddaughter's, hearing firsthand how these routine procedures and security protocols become weapons of humiliation. She met Marcus's gaze again. Dr. Ramirez recognized me. I thought she'd ask me to leave, but instead, she invited me to share my perspective not as a victim, but as someone who had been on the other side, who had wielded those policies as weapons without ever questioning them. That took courage, Marcus acknowledged. Not as much courage as it took for you to face me now, Brenda replied. I've spent the past 2 years volunteering with Dr. Ramirez's program, sharing my story, not as a victim, but as someone who recognizes the harm I caused and wants to prevent others from causing similar harm. Marcus absorbed this information, finding himself unexpectedly moved by her journey. That can't have been easy either. It wasn't. Brenda acknowledged. Admitting you were wrong rarely is, especially when your wrongness caused real harm to another person. She looked up at him again. I want you to know that I'm profoundly sorry for what I did to you that day. The assumptions I made, the humiliation I caused, the experience I robbed from you. There's no justification, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed you to hear that I recognize the wrong I did. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. Not the defensive apology of someone seeking absolution, but the genuine acknowledgement of someone who had done the difficult work of confronting her own prejudices. Marcus sat with her words, feeling the complex swirl of emotions they evoked. The 17-year-old who had stood in handcuffs at gate C18 might have rejected her apology outright. But the 22-year-old who had spent 5 years building something transformative from that experience could recognize the courage it took for her to be here to face him directly. Thank you for saying that, he said finally. For what it's worth, I think the work you're doing now matters. It's easy to vilify individuals for their actions without addressing the systems that enable those actions. Real change requires both individual accountability and systemic transformation. Brenda nodded, seemingly surprised and touched by his response. Your initiative is doing exactly that, changing the individuals and the systems simultaneously. That's the goal, Marcus agreed. And hearing about your journey from enforcing those boundaries to helping dismantle them, that's actually a powerful example of the kind of transformation we're trying to create. A comfortable silence settled between them, not the awkward tension of their initial encounter, but something more thoughtful, more humane. Would you be willing, Marcus asked after a moment, to share your story as part of our training materials? Not as a villain, but as someone who recognized her biases and worked to change them. That kind of authentic evolution can be more powerful than theoretical examples. Brenda looked genuinely surprised by the offer. You would want that. After what I did, because of what you did, and because of what you've done since, Marcus clarified. Your journey from that day to this one represents exactly the kind of transformation we're trying to create, not just in policies, but in people. The conversation was interrupted by Lawrence's approach, his expression carefully neutral as he recognized Brenda. Marcus, they're asking for you for the final photographs, he said, then acknowledged Brenda with a slight nod. Ms. Matthews. Mr. Wilson, she replied, visibly nervous in his presence. I was just apologizing to Marcus for my actions 5 years ago. Lawrence studied her for a moment. I understand you've been working with Dr. Ramirez's program. Yes, Brenda confirmed. For the past 2 years. Lawrence nodded thoughtfully. Accountability matters, but so does growth. He extended his hand to her, not in friendship exactly, but in recognition of her journey. I'm glad you came tonight. As Marcus excused himself to join the photograph session, he glanced back to see his father and Brenda engaged in quiet conversation, two people forever connected by a pivotal moment, now finding a way forward that acknowledged both the harm done and the healing possible. Later, as the gala concluded and guests began to depart, Marcus found himself reflecting on the unexpected encounter. There was something profoundly fitting about Brenda's presence at this 5th anniversary celebration, a reminder that transformation wasn't just about programs and policies, but about people capable of recognizing their biases and choosing a different path. 5 years ago, she had looked at him and seen someone who didn't belong. Tonight, she had looked at him and seen the fullness of his humanity, and in doing so had reclaimed a measure of her own. It wasn't a fairy tale ending or a neat resolution. It was messier, more complex, more human. But perhaps that was the point. True redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about creating a future informed by its lessons. The observation deck of O'Hare International Airport's Tower 5 offered a panoramic view of the sprawling complex runways stretching into the distance. Aircraft taxiing in choreographed precision, the constant flow of arrivals and departures that constituted the daily rhythm of one of the world's busiest airports. As the sun began its descent, casting a golden glow across the scene, the Wilson family, Lawrence, Catherine, and Marcus, stood side by side at the railing, watching an Atlantic Sky Boeing 787 prepare for takeoff. It was the day after the gala, a quieter moment carved out for reflection, before all three returned to their respective lives. Lawrence to the corporate headquarters in New York, Catherine to her legal practice, Marcus to his studies at Harvard Law. Gate C18 is just visible from here, Lawrence noted, pointing toward Terminal 3. Hard to believe that's where it all started. Marcus followed his father's gaze, considering how a single location could hold such significance in a life's trajectory. Sometimes I wonder who I'd be if that hadn't happened. If Brenda Matthews had just scanned my ticket and waved me through. Who do you think you'd be? Catherine asked, her hand resting lightly on her son's shoulder. Marcus considered this. Probably still in tech, still interested in coding. But I doubt I'd be in law school focusing on tech ethics and civil rights. He paused. I'd know less about the world, about how systems work and how they fail. Lawrence nodded, understanding. The statistician in me wants to measure the impact in numbers. 5 years, 24 scholarships, 43% increase in diverse leadership, $50 million invested. He gestured toward the busy airport below them. But the father in me keeps coming back to that day. To the feeling of hearing you say those words. Dad, they handcuffed me. It changed all of us, Catherine observed quietly. Before that day, we each had our own approaches to fighting injustice. Lawrence with his corporate influence, me with my legal challenges, Marcus with his technology. We were working in parallel, but not together. And now, Marcus asked. Now we understand the power of integration, Catherine said. My legal perspective informing Lawrence's corporate initiatives. Your technology providing the data to support both our approaches. Lawrence smiled at his wife, acknowledging the journey they had taken together. The incident had initially created tension in their marriage, Catherine believing Lawrence's corporate approach was too cautious. Lawrence feeling Catherine's legal strategy was too confrontational. But over time, they had found a powerful synergy in their different methods. Speaking of your technology, Lawrence said to Marcus, Kevin Rodriguez sent me the latest impact report from the Fairflight app. The numbers are remarkable. Marcus nodded, pride evident in his expression. 3 million downloads worldwide, over 500,000 incidents documented across 142 countries. But the most important metric is the intervention rate. 72% of reported incidents now receive immediate intervention before they escalate. The pattern recognition engine has been the game changer, Catherine added. Being able to identify hotspots, specific gates, airports, even individual employees with concerning patterns, allows for targeted training and accountability. Marcus pulled out his tablet, opening a visualization dashboard that displayed a real-time map of global aviation activity. Colored dots represented incidents reported through the app, with clusters automatically identified and flagged for intervention. We've added a new feature, he explained, tapping the screen to zoom in on O'Hare. The predictive module now forecasts potential incident hotspots based on historical patterns, staffing changes, and passenger demographics. It allows advocacy teams to deploy proactively rather than reactively. He demonstrated how the system had evolved from a simple reporting tool into a sophisticated platform, integrating artificial intelligence, blockchain verification, and behavioral prediction models, all while maintaining strict user privacy protections. The best part, Marcus continued swiping to a new screen, is the measurable impact. In airports with high app adoption and active advocacy programs, reported incidents have decreased by 68% over 3 years. Not because incidents aren't being reported, but because they're actually not happening as frequently. Lawrence studied the data with satisfaction. And James Peterson, has he seen these numbers? A smile touched Marcus's lips. He has. That's why Sky Global finally joined the Aviation Equity Alliance last month. The business case became too compelling to ignore. Their incident rates were 47% higher than Alliance members, and it was affecting their customer satisfaction scores and market share. Never underestimate the power of data to change minds when moral arguments fail, Catherine observed dryly. The massive jet they'd been watching began its takeoff, roll engines powering up as it accelerated down the runway. They watched in silence as it lifted into the sky, banking gently as it ascended into the golden evening light. Dr. Ramirez shared something interesting with me last night, Marcus said after a moment. In the 5 years since the initiative began, reported incidents of bias across participating airlines have decreased by 72%. Not just at Atlantic Sky, but industry-wide. That's significant, Lawrence acknowledged. But here's what really matters. It's not because people stopped reporting. It's because airlines started intervening earlier, addressing issues before they escalated to incidents like mine. Marcus turned to face his parents directly. That's real change, not just responding to problems, but preventing them. Catherine nodded, pride evident in her expression. That's always been your focus, hasn't it? Not just reacting to what happened to you, but creating systems to prevent it from happening to others. I learned that from both of you, Marcus replied. Dad's strategic thinking and your passion for justice. I just added technology to the mix. Lawrence placed a hand on his son's shoulder. When I built Atlantic Sky, I thought I was creating a legacy. Something to pass down to you someday. But what you've helped build through the initiative, that's a different kind of legacy. More important, more lasting. We built it together, Marcus corrected. None of us could have done it alone. Catherine considered this, then nodded in acknowledgement. That's true. Lawrence's position opened doors. My legal expertise protected what we built, and your technical vision made it scalable beyond what either of us could have imagined. Marcus leaned on the railing, watching another aircraft prepare for departure. I've been thinking about what comes next. After law school. And his parents prompted simultaneously. I want to expand the initiative's focus. Beyond aviation, beyond transportation even. The principles we've established, prevention, rather than reaction. Systemic change, rather than individual blame. Accountability, with opportunity for growth. They could transform other industries too. Lawrence nodded thoughtfully. You're thinking bigger. I learned that from you too, Marcus said with a smile, but with a twist. You taught me to build. Mom taught me to build with purpose. Catherine smiled, taking her husband's hand. And you've learned to do both better than either of us. The observation deck had grown darker as the sun disappeared below the horizon. The runways below, now illuminated by thousands of lights stretching into the distance. Aircraft continued their choreographed dance of arrival and departure, each one carrying hundreds of lives, each journey representing the physical manifestation of connection across distance. 5 years ago, Lawrence said quietly, we stood in this same airport under very different circumstances. Marcus in handcuffs, me in fury, Catherine ready to file lawsuits, all of us wounded in different ways. And now, Marcus asked. Lawrence gestured toward the expansive view. Now I look at this airport, at the airline I built, at the initiative that bears your name, at the technology you've created, and I see something transformed. Not perfect, not finished, but fundamentally changed from what it was. Catherine nodded in agreement. That's the true measure of justice, I think. Not punishment, but transformation. Not retribution, but renewal. Marcus felt the truth of these words settle within him. 5 years ago, handcuffs had been placed on his wrists in this very airport, a moment of public humiliation that could have left him bitter, angry, diminished. Instead, that moment had become the catalyst for something profound, not just programs and policies, but a fundamental shift in how an entire industry understood and practiced belonging. As they turned to leave, the lights of departing aircraft traced golden paths across the darkening sky, symbols of journeys continuing, of distances bridged, of transformations still unfolding. And in that image lay the final resolution that the most powerful response to injustice was not to tear down, but to build, not to retaliate, but to renovate, not to punish, but to transform. It was a resolution not of ending, but of continuation of work that would extend far beyond this moment, this airport, this industry. Work that had begun with handcuffs at gate C-18, but would continue as long as there were spaces where some were made to feel they didn't belong, and others empowered to build a world where everyone did. The story of Marcus Wilson's journey from humiliation to transformation reminds us that true justice isn't found in punishment or retribution, but in creating meaningful change. What began as a single act of discrimination became the catalyst for an industry-wide revolution in equity and inclusion. Marcus and Lawrence Wilson turned pain into purpose, building a legacy far more significant than an airline. They built a pathway to opportunity for thousands. If this story touched you, please like this video to help it reach more viewers. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of transformation and resilience. And share it with someone who needs to be reminded that our darkest moments can become our greatest opportunities for change. Because as Marcus Wilson showed us, the most powerful response to injustice is not anger, but action. Not vengeance, but vision. Each of us has the capacity to convert our most painful experiences into our most meaningful contributions.